There's a recording device in your office. The whisper was so small it was almost lost in the cavernous silence of his study, a room designed to swallow sound. Kang Dae-hyun did not flinch. His entire life had been an education in controlling reaction, in presenting a face of granite to a world that chipped away at men. He was seated behind a desk of polished obsidian that spanned the width of a lesser man's apartment, the city of Seoul glittering like a conquered jewel through the floor-to-ceiling armored glass behind him. Before him stood a young woman in a dark blue maid's uniform, her hands clasped nervously. Beside her, half hidden behind her mother's leg, was the source of the whisper. A little girl, no older than 10, her eyes wide and dark like his desk, her smallness made even more pronounced by a light pink dress that seemed to radiate a defiant innocence in the room's austere, masculine gloom. Dae-hyun's gaze, cold and analytical, shifted from the mother, Imani, to the child, Maya. He had approved their hiring himself a new cleaning service vetted and cleared. Yet here was the breach. Not a gunshot, not a bomb, but a whisper from a child. "What did you say?" His voice was low, a rumble of gravel that had silenced boardrooms and broken hardened criminals. The mother flinched, pulling her daughter closer. "I am so sorry, Mr. Kang. She has an imagination." Dae-hyun ignored her. His focus was entirely on the girl. He saw no guile in her eyes, only a profound, simple fear mixed with a stubborn resolve. He leaned forward, the expensive leather of his chair groaning in protest. "Look at me, child." Maya hesitated, then peeked out from behind her mother's dress. He softened his voice, a trick he hadn't used in decades, a tone reserved for taming wild, frightened things. "Tell me again." Slowly, she swallowed, her small hands clutching the blue fabric of her mother's uniform. "Under your desk," she whispered, her voice a little stronger now. "There's a little black square, with a tiny glass eye. It's stuck there with tape. It's watching you, a recording device. Not just a bug for audio, but a camera."
A teeny spy camera.
The implications crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. His office. His sanctuary. The one place where strategies were formed, allegiances tested, and sentences passed. Every conversation, every document reviewed, every flicker of emotion he allowed himself in private.
Watched.
Recorded. The chill that spread through him had nothing to do with the room's powerful air conditioning. It was the icy touch of betrayal, intimate and absolute. Who? The list was terrifyingly short. Only a handful of people had the access, the nerve. His mind, a finely tuned machine for calculating threat, began to spin through the possibilities, each one a deeper cut than the last. He looked at the child, this impossible variable, this tiny, observant ghost in a pink dress, and a feeling he couldn't name stirred within him. She had not run. She had not told her mother to be dismissed and forget. She had stood her ground and whispered the truth directly to the monster in the chair. He held the child's gaze for a moment longer, a silent transaction passing between them. Then, he straightened up, his face once again an unreadable mask. He addressed the mother, Imani, his tone clipped and professional. "Your work for today is complete. You will be compensated for the full day." Imani looked confused, her hands fluttering nervously. "But sir, we've only just begun the main parlor." "You are dismissed," he repeated, the words carrying an unmistakable finality. He pressed a button on his intercom. "My driver will see you home." He watched as Imani, looking utterly bewildered and frightened, hurried her daughter from the room. Maya glanced back one last time, her dark eyes locking with his, a flicker of understanding, or perhaps just childish curiosity, in their depths. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and the silence descended once more, but it was different now. It was charged, predatory. Dae-hyun remained perfectly still for a full 5 minutes, a statue carved from suspicion. He listened. He let the silence settle, waiting for any indication he was being observed in real time. Nothing. He rose from his chair, his movements fluid and silent, a predator in his own territory. He didn't immediately look under the desk. That would be too obvious if someone was monitoring a live feed. Instead, he walked to the window, gazing out at the sprawling city lights. He ran a hand over his jaw, a gesture of contemplation he knew he'd made 1,000 times in this room. He was performing for an unseen audience. He then moved to his private bar, pouring a measure of whiskey into a heavy crystal tumbler. He swirled the amber liquid, his mind a whirlwind of cold fury. The device was professional, hidden with care. This was not the work of a common thief or a low-level informant. This was someone from the inside. Someone who knew his routines, his blind spots. Finally, feigning a slight stumble, he let the tumbler slip from his grasp. It shattered on the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing in the stillness. Cursing under his breath, another piece of the performance, he knelt, ostensibly to pick up the larger shards of glass. His head was now naturally below the level of the massive obsidian desk. He didn't need to search. His eyes, trained to spot anomalies, went directly to where Maya must have seen it. There, tucked deep in the recess where the desk's leg met the main body, was a small black square. It was no bigger than his thumbnail, attached with a strip of high-adhesion black tape. A faint, almost invisible blue light pulsed from its center. A data transmission light. Not just recording. It was broadcasting. The blood in his veins turned to ice. It wasn't just about past events. It was about the present. They were watching him right now. He carefully gathered a few pieces of glass, his movements deliberate, his expression one of mere annoyance. He rose, disposed of the glass, and returned to his chair. He sat, the mask of control firmly back in place, but inside, a storm raged. The betrayal was absolute. The danger was immediate. And his only warning had come from the innocent eyes of a child who should never have been there. His world, so meticulously constructed on pillars of loyalty and fear, had fractured. Now, every face was a potential mask, every loyal word a potential lie. He sat in the encroaching darkness of his study, the city lights outside mocking his isolation. The list of suspects was a litany of pain. It could only be someone with unrestricted access not only to his office but to his life. The circle was poisonously small. First, his mind went to Minjun, his second-in-command, the man he had raised from a street-smart enforcer to his most trusted lieutenant. Minjun was the brother he'd never had, his shadow in every negotiation, his sword in every conflict. A flashback, sharp and unwelcome, pierced his concentration. Dae-hyun, younger, bleeding from a knife wound in a grimy warehouse alley. Minjun, barely an adult himself, standing over the bodies of their attackers, his loyalty forged in blood and gunpowder. "I will never let them touch you, Hyung," he had vowed, using the respectful term for an older brother. Could that man, that boy, plant a camera under his desk? The motive would have to be monumental. Greed? Ambition? Had the years of being second in line curdled his loyalty into resentment? The thought was a physical ache in his chest. Then, a colder, more devastating possibility emerged.
Yeon.
His fiancée. Beautiful, intelligent, and poised, she was the perfect partner for a man of his stature. She moved through his world of brutal power with an effortless grace that had captivated him. He had allowed himself to believe she was different, that her affection was genuine, a quiet harbor in his turbulent life. He remembered a night just a week ago, in this very room. She had sat on his lap, her fingers tracing the lines of his face, her voice a soft murmur against his ear. "You carry so much, Dae-hyun. Let me help you bear it." Had she been searching for a blind spot then? Had her soft touch been a distraction while her eyes scanned for a place to hide their treachery? The wedding was in 2 weeks. An alliance of power, yes, but he had let himself believe it was more. If it was her, the betrayal was not just strategic, it was a violation of the soul. The camera was broadcasting. They were watching him, waiting for him to react, to make a mistake. He had to assume that both Minjun and Ji-yeon were compromised, working together. But for whom? A partnership of ambition like that needed a patron, a silent backer with the resources and the motive to dismantle his empire. The name surfaced like a bloated corpse from a dark river, Chairman Park. An old rival, a snake he thought he had crushed years ago. Park was patient, a master of playing the long game, of using others' greed as his weapon. It all fit. Park would promise Minjun the throne and Ji-yeon the power she craved, all while planning to discard them once Dae-hyun was gone. The weight of this new reality was crushing. He was utterly alone, surrounded by enemies wearing the faces of friends. His entire organization could be compromised. He couldn't trust his guards, his advisors, his own future wife. The paranoia he had kept leashed for years was now loose, snarling in the cage of his mind. He needed an anchor. He needed someone outside the blast radius, someone from the old world, bound by an honor that no longer seemed to exist. The decision was made in the cold calculus of survival. Trust was a currency he could no longer afford to spend, except on the oldest of debts. He picked up a heavily encrypted satellite phone, a relic he hadn't used in 5 years, and dialed a number known only to him. It rang twice before a gruff, familiar voice answered. There were no greetings. The old tea house. 1 hour, he hung up. An hour later, Dae-hyun slipped out of his penthouse through a service exit, dressed not as a corporate titan but as a ghost, in dark, nondescript clothing. He took the subway, the press of anonymous bodies a welcome shield. The tea house was a small, unassuming place tucked away in a quiet corner of Insadong, a place that time had forgotten. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and roasted barley. Seated at a low table in the back was Mr. Choi, his former mentor and his father's most loyal enforcer. Choi was a man carved from old loyalties, his face a roadmap of hard-won battles. His hands, though wrinkled, still looked capable of breaking bone. He was retired, living a quiet life, but Dae-hyun knew the warrior within him only slept. Choi looked up as Dae-hyun approached, his eyes sharp and assessing. He gestured to the seat opposite him without a word, pouring a cup of steaming tea. For several minutes, they sat in silence, a comfortable ritual from a lifetime ago. Finally, Choi spoke, his voice a low rasp. You look like a man who has seen a ghost. Dae-hyun didn't smile. He reached into his pocket and placed a small, clear evidence bag on the table. Inside was the camera, which he had carefully retrieved after disabling the building's local network repeaters, forcing the device to store data locally rather than transmit. He had handled it only with gloves. Choi picked up the bag, his eyes narrowing as he examined the device. He turned it over, his gaze lingering on the microscopic serial numbers. German optics. Military-grade encryption on the local storage. Broadcast chip is Israeli. This is not something you buy online. He placed it back on the table, his expression grim. This was placed by someone who could walk up to you and touch you. Dae-hyun's silence was his confirmation. Minjun, he said, the name tasting like ash. And Ji-yeon, Choi's face showed no surprise, only a deep, weary sadness. Ambition is a cancer. It grows in the shadows. And Chairman Park. He is the only one with the motive and the means to orchestrate it, Dae-hyun affirmed. He would be the beneficiary. Choi nodded slowly, his gaze distant. Park always preferred poison to a blade. He turns your own strength against you. He looked at Dae-hyun, his eyes filled with a paternal fire that had been extinguished in everyone else. They are watching you. They expect you to panic, to purge your ranks, to show your hand. You will do none of those things. You will be the man your father raised.
Calm. Silent.
Lethal. The old warrior's confidence was a bomb on Dae-hyun's frayed nerves. Here, in this quiet tea house, he was not alone. He had an ally. A real one. What do we do? Dae-hyun asked, the question a surrender of his own isolation. Choi leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You will give them the performance of their lives. The wedding is in 2 weeks. A perfect stage. We will not dismantle the trap. We will let them walk into it. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception, a waking nightmare played out on a stage of opulence and lies. Dae-hyun moved through his days like a phantom, his face a carefully constructed mask of a man in love, a leader in control. He hosted dinners, chaired meetings, and approved shipments, all under the imagined gaze of a traitors. Every interaction with Ji-yeon was an exercise in supreme self-control. That evening, he took her to a private dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Han River. She was radiant in a silk dress, her laughter like music, but to him, it was a discordant symphony. "You seem distant tonight, my love," she said, her hand covering his on the table. Her touch felt like a spider's crawl. He forced a smile, bringing her hand to his lips. "Just the final preparations for the wedding. I want everything to be perfect. It will be," she purred, her eyes shining with an emotion he now knew was pure deceit. "It will be the beginning of our new life together." The dramatic irony was so thick he could taste it. He saw Min-jun the next day at the main distribution hub. His right-hand man clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie that now felt like a prelude to a stab in the back. "Everything is running smoothly, Hyung. The final security details for the wedding are locked in. No one will get within 100 feet of the venue without our approval." "Good," Dae-hyun said, his voice even. "I am trusting you with my life, Min-jun." "With our future," Min-jun's eyes met his, and for a fleeting second, Dae-hyun thought he saw a flicker of the old loyalty, a hint of guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a confident smile. "Always, Hyung." You know that he was playing his part perfectly, but the strain was immense. At night, alone in his silent study, the mask would fall. He would sit in the dark, the whiskey doing little to dull the ache of betrayal. He thought of the child, Maya. Her simple, unvarnished truth was a beacon in his sea of lies. She hadn't been trying to gain favor or manipulate him. She had seen something wrong and had spoken up, a pure, moral act that felt alien in his world. He had her to thank for his life, for the chance to fight back. He felt a strange, protective urge, a need to shield that innocence from the darkness that was attempting to consume him. This fight was no longer just about his empire or his survival. It was about proving that such simple goodness could not be extinguished by the calculated evil of men like Park. He had to win, not just for himself, but for the principle that a child's whisper could be more powerful than a traitor's knife. He had to ensure the world that had produced Maya continued to exist, safe from the one he inhabited. A week before the wedding, Dae-hyun found himself restless, the intricate plotting with Mr. Choi doing little to soothe the cold knot of anxiety in his stomach. He needed to see her again. He needed to look at the one honest person in his life. He made a call to his household manager. "The new cleaning service. I found their work to be exceptional. Have them come to my private residence this afternoon. There are some delicate artworks that require special attention." It was a flimsy pretext, but it was enough. Later that day, he walked into his living area, a vast, minimalist space with panoramic views, and found Imani carefully dusting a porcelain vase. And there, sitting quietly on a plush ottoman, was Maya, her hands folded in the lap of the same light pink dress. It was clean and pressed, but he noticed the faint fraying at the hem. She wasn't reading or playing with a phone. She was just observing, her eyes taking in the details of the room with a quiet intensity. When she saw him, she didn't look scared, just watchful. He dismissed Imani with a gesture, asking her to attend to the gallery on the upper floor. He walked over and sat not on the sofa opposite Maya, but on the floor, cross-legged, bringing himself closer to her level. It was an act of humility he hadn't shown anyone in years. "Hello, Maya," he said softly. She nodded, her eyes fixed on his face. "Hello, thank you," he said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. "What you did in my office, that was very brave." She considered this for a moment. "My mom says you shouldn't keep secrets if they can hurt someone, a simple philosophy, yet it cut through the Gordian knot of his entire existence. In his world, secrets were currency, weapons, and shields. To her, they were simply a burden that could cause pain. He saw it then, the chasm between their worlds. He had built an empire on calculated risk and brutal necessity, but she operated on a code of simple right and wrong. She had saved him not out of loyalty or fear, but because it was the right thing to do. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. He held it out to her. "This is for you," she hesitated, looking toward the hallway where her mother had gone. "It's okay," he assured her. With tentative fingers, she took the box and carefully unwrapped it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a delicate platinum chain. Hanging from it was a small, exquisitely carved charm, a single, perfect rose, its petals studded with tiny, glittering diamonds. It was worth more than her mother would make in a decade. Her eyes widened, but not with greed. It was with a pure, childish wonder. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's a reminder," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't recognize, "that even in dark rooms, small things can shine the brightest." Don't ever lose that. He knew in that moment that his victory had to be total. He had to eradicate the rot completely, not just for his own power, but to create a space where a child like this could remain safe, untouched by the filth he dealt with daily. She was his new moral compass, an anchor of innocence in a world of sin. The plan was a thing of brutal elegance. With Mr. Choi's guidance, Dae-hyun turned the traitor's weapon against them. He had a technician, a man whose loyalty was sworn to Choi and not to his own organization, create a perfect replica of the spy camera. They swapped it out one night, leaving the original, now active again, in its place. But this new device fed a loop. For the last week, Ji-yeon and Min-joon had been watching a meticulously crafted fiction, Dae-hyun proceeding with wedding plans, oblivious, Dae-hyun making unsecured calls about transferring assets into a joint account with Ji-yeon, to be finalized the day after the wedding, Dae-hyun telling his lawyer over the phone that his will was being updated to make Ji-yeon his sole beneficiary. They were feeding the beast, making it fat and complacent before the slaughter. The real work was happening in secret, in whispered meetings with a handful of old guard loyalists Choi had summoned from retirement. These were men who had served his father, men whose honor was forged in a different, harder era. They moved like shadows, resecuring Dae-hyun's empire from the inside out, identifying everyone who had been turned by Min-joon and marking them. The wedding was the centerpiece of the trap. It was to be held at a lavish, exclusive hotel whose owner owed Dae-hyun a life-altering favor. The security, so confidently arranged by Min-joon, would be subtly replaced by Choi's men at the last minute. The guest list itself was a weapon. Every powerful figure, every ally, and every potential enemy would be in attendance, there to witness either Dae-hyun's greatest triumph or his spectacular fall. The night before the wedding, Dae-hyun stood on his balcony, the city lights a cold fire below. He felt a strange calm. The paranoia had been replaced by a chilling certainty. He wasn't the prey anymore. He was the hunter, and the trap was set. He thought of Ji-yeon, likely sleeping soundly, dreaming of her new kingdom. He thought of Min-joon, envisioning his ascent to the throne. They saw him as a stepping stone, a final obstacle to be removed. They had forgotten who he was. They had forgotten the lessons his father had taught him, lessons written in the blood of his enemies. Tomorrow he would remind them. He glanced at the small, velvet-lined box on his nightstand. Inside was a simple platinum band. A prop. The real symbol of his future was not this ring, but the image of a little girl in a pink dress, her eyes holding a truth more precious than any diamond. He was not just fighting for his life. He was fighting for a world where she could keep her innocence. It was the most important deal of his life, and he would not fail. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect blue sky that felt like a mockery. The Grand Imperial Hotel ballroom was a fantasy of white roses and shimmering crystal. Hundreds of guests, a veritable who's who of Seoul's elite and its underworld, mingled, their laughter and chatter a low hum of anticipation. Dae-hyun stood at the altar, a statue in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His face was serene, but his heart hammered against his ribs, a war drum counting down the final seconds. He saw Min-joon near the front, standing proud, playing the part of the loyal best man. He gave Dae-hyun a sharp, confident nod. The fool. Then, the music swelled, and the great doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Ji-yeon appeared, a vision in white lace and diamonds, her smile dazzling. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes locked with Dae-hyun's. He saw her triumph, the barely concealed avarice behind the loving facade. She was so close to her prize. He could almost feel Chairman Park's satisfaction, miles away, watching his puppets dance. The ceremony was a blur. The officiant's words washed over him, meaningless platitudes in the face of the violent truth simmering just beneath the surface. He went through the motions, his responses automatic. Then came the vows. Ji-yeon went first, her voice ringing with practiced sincerity, promising eternal love and devotion. The crowd sighed, captivated. Then it was his turn. He took her hands, his grip firm. He looked into her eyes, letting her see, for the first time, the abyss behind his own. "I, Kang Dae-hyun," he began, his voice low and steady. "Take you, Han Ji-yeon, to be my wife." He paused, letting the tension build. He could feel Min-jun shifting uneasily. "I promise to give you exactly what you deserve." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Before she could react, he continued, "And I promise to honor and to protect my family from all enemies, foreign and domestic." He squeezed her hands, a silent, final warning. He said the words, "I do." The trap was now sprung. The officiant, a man on Choi's peril, quickly pronounced them husband and wife. As he leaned in for the kiss, a kiss that never came, he whispered in her ear, his voice a blade of ice. "Did you really think I would know?" Her eyes widened in genuine shock, the mask of the loving bride shattering completely. The applause from the guests was thunderous, a standing ovation for a play whose bloody final act they were about to witness. He led her back down the aisle, his smile now real, predatory, and utterly terrifying. He had her. They were all his. The reception was in full swing, the champagne flowing freely. Dae-hyun and Ji-yeon sat at the head table on a raised dais, a king and his new, treacherous queen. Min-jun stood nearby, accepting congratulations on his boss's behalf, the picture of loyalty. The trap had been baited with the finest cheese. After the toasts, Dae-hyun rose, tapping a glass for silence. A hush fell over the opulent ballroom. "My friends, my family," he began, his voice resonating with warmth and power. "Thank you for sharing this joyous day with me. A wedding is a time of union, of new beginnings. It is also a time for truth." He smiled at Ji-yeon, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "My beautiful bride and I have decided to begin our marriage with an act of complete honesty. No more secrets." On cue, the massive screens on either side of the ballroom, which had been displaying a slideshow of the happy couple, flickered to life. But it wasn't a photo that appeared. It was a live feed from a hidden camera. The image was of a dimly lit, luxurious office. Chairman Park's office. The old man was seated, a smug look on his face, a glass of brandy in his hand. Standing before him were two figures. The footage was from 2 nights ago. Choi's men had planted their own bug during a security sweep. The audio was crystal clear. "He suspects nothing," a familiar voice said. The camera zoomed in. It was Min-jun. "The assets will be transferred the day after the wedding. Once they are in Ji-yeon's control, we move." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Min-jun froze, his face draining of all color. Ji-yeon shot to her feet, her face a mask of horror. On the screen, her own voice, cool and calculating, filled the room. "Dae-hyun is sentimental. He thinks this is about love. He won't see the knife until it's in his heart. Once he's eliminated, his organization will fall to Min-jun, and I will control the wealth. We will deliver the entire empire to you, Chairman." The room was utterly silent now, the air crackling with tension. Dae-hyun's voice cut through the silence like a razor. "Lock the doors." At his command, a dozen men, previously disguised as waiters and security, moved with chilling efficiency. Choi's old guard. They secured every exit, their faces grim and impassive. Min-jun made a desperate move for his weapon, but he was surrounded instantly. Ji-yeon, white as her dress, stumbled back, her eyes darting around for an escape that didn't exist. Dae-hyun slowly descended from the dais, his steps measured and deliberate. He stopped before Min-jun. "You are my brother," he said, his voice laced with a cold, profound sorrow. He then turned to Ji-yeon, who was trembling, her beautiful face contorted with fear. "And I was going to give you the world," he whispered. "But you wanted to take it instead." He gestured to Choi's men. "Take them, and send Chairman Park a message. Tell him his puppets have been put away, and that I am coming to collect my debt, The wedding guests, frozen in a mixture of terror and awe, watched as the bride and the best man were dragged away, their fairy tale ending turning into a nightmare of their own making. The silence in Daehyun's study was different now. It was clean. The rot had been excised, the betrayal cauterized with fire and precision. Chairman Park's empire was already crumbling, his lieutenants deserting him in the face of Daehyun's swift and merciless retribution. The war was over before it had truly begun. But victory felt hollow. He had secured his throne, but the cost was the last of his trust in the world he had built. He sat behind his obsidian desk, the city lights outside no longer looking like a conquest, but like a million lonely fires. He thought of Maya. He had won, and in doing so, he had protected the small, bright world she represented. That, he realized, was the only part of the victory that mattered. He pressed the intercom. Send for Imani and her daughter. Now, a short time later, they were escorted in. Imani was trembling, convinced she was about to be punished for her daughter's transgression. Maya, however, looked at him with the same steady, unnerving calm. She was still wearing the pink dress. Daehyun rose and came around the desk, closing the distance between them. He knelt, not as a king, but as a man, so he was looking directly into Imani's eyes. "Your daughter saved my life," he said, his voice devoid of its usual menace. "She showed me a loyalty more real than any I have ever known. A debt like that cannot be repaid with money." Imani stared, speechless. From this day forward, Daehyun continued, his gaze shifting to include Maya. "You are both under my protection. You will want for nothing. Maya will attend the finest school in the country. You will have a new home, away from all this. You will never have to clean another man's office again." He wasn't asking, he was stating a new reality. It wasn't a threat, but a vow. "I have spent my life surrounded by darkness, Imani. Your daughter, she is a light. I will not allow my world to touch her. But I will use all my power to ensure her world remains safe." Imani finally found her voice, tears streaming down her face.
Why?
"Why would you do this for us?" Daehyun looked at Maya, who was now clutching the small rose charm on her necklace. He saw his own reflection in her wide, innocent eyes, and for the first time in his life, he saw a man worth saving. "Because she reminded me," he said softly, "that some things are not for sale. Some things must simply be protected." He had started this ordeal as a king defending his castle. He ended it as something more.
A guardian.
A protector of innocence. The little girl in the pink dress had not just exposed a camera, she had exposed his heart. And in doing so, she had given him a new, and far greater, empire to rule. We often believe that power lies in strength, in walls built high and armies amassed. We measure a person's worth by the empire they command, the fear they inspire. But this story teaches us a different truth. It shows us that true strength is not always loud. Sometimes, it is a whisper in a silent room. Sometimes, the greatest threats are not the enemies at the gate, but the smiling faces at our table. Betrayal from a loved one cuts deeper than any blade, leaving wounds that power and money cannot heal. Daehyun was a king in a world of monsters, a man who had forgotten the language of trust. Yet, it was not another king or a powerful army that saved him. It was a child, armed with nothing but innocence and the simple courage to speak the truth. Her honesty was a light that cut through the darkest deception, reminding a hardened man of a world he had long forgotten, a world where right and wrong were still simple ideas. Think about your own life. Who are the people you trust without question? What would you do if you discovered that trust was a lie? Would you crumble, or would you find a new source of strength in an unexpected place? This tale is a reminder that the most powerful force in the universe is not greed or ambition, but the untainted heart of the innocent. It reminds us to listen to the whispers, to pay attention to the small, quiet truths that are so easily overlooked in our loud and complicated world. For it is often in the most humble of places that we find our greatest salvation. What did you think of Daehyun's transformation? Do you believe his act of protection was his true redemption? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama, redemption, and the surprising power of the human heart.